having a connection to your values and creating boundaries. And most people can create boundaries. That's not really the difficult part, but enforcing them is hard. And it is also due to your self-esteem. What do I deserve? But I think the boundary piece is very connected to resilience.
Emily Austen is the founder and CEO of PR agency Emerge, author of Smarter and a strategic PR advisor to UN Women UK. On this week's episode of CEO Yourself, we deep dive her CEO superpower, resilience. Emily Austen, welcome to CEO Yourself.
Thank you for having me.
I am in awe of everything you've achieved of late, and I'm so excited to deep dive your story. You are the CEO. Do you call yourself the CEO, director?
I am the CEO, yes.
Yes, you're the CEO of Emerge, and you have a team of 26?
Well, 26 bodies full-time, and it's about 32 on the payroll.
Incredible. And you have just launched your new book, Smarter,
yes,
which we have here today for those watching. On top of that, you are a strategic PR advisor to UN Women UK. How do you do it all?
Massive question. I've learned a lot this year about focus. So I have now created a business where I do have people I trust that I can delegate to. And I've had to go through that process of understanding the difference between urgent and important, working out where my time is best spent. And I replay in my head the idea that if I'm doing someone else's job, then no one's doing mine. So I'm quite clear about if someone else can do it, they should be doing it. And then I should hold the things that only I can do.
Did it take you a long time to learn how to delegate?
I think delegation is really, really challenging. And I say to my team, you don't have a delegation problem, you have a trust problem. Because ultimately all it is you're asking people to tag in and move forward a piece of work that you either don't have time to do or need additional input. So you have to trust that they're going to do that. And I think delegation is all about momentum. I think the challenges that I had with it are I had a very clear vision of what I wanted things to look like, and teaching other people often takes a lot of time. So in theory, you're just like, I'll do it myself because it will be exactly how I want it, etc. But actually, when you're running a team, you have a responsibility to bring them on the journey with you and, teach them. You might have to teach them 10 times, but at some point they'll get it. And then that sort of begins to automate, and then you can go on and do the next thing. So it's a difficult thing to master. It took me a long time, probably more because I didn't have the right people to delegate to. But also when you're running a company, you've got different timeframes in your head all the time. You're doing like, what's happening today? What's the longer view? What's happening in 6 months? You're constantly thinking about how political, social, cultural nuances will affect, in my industry, it's an agency, so our clients, kind of what comes down the pipe back to us. And then you get curveballs, or people resign, or, minimum wage change, or whatever it is. And so you've got to run different timeframes alongside each other all the time. And you can't do everything, and nor should you be doing everything, I don't think. But a lot of that comes down to control and trust. So I think sometimes people focus on the wrong thing with delegation.
I think trust is one of the hardest skills to flex at work, particularly in the recruitment process.
Yeah, I mean, recruitment's tough because it's kind of the best anyone's ever going to be, right? They're like turning up to try and get a job. So we always say, if you don't have a retention problem, you have a hiring problem. If you're having to fire people, there's a problem about the way that you're bringing them into the business. And in a growing company, your needs change. So the person you needed 12 months ago, as you were growing, might not be the person you need now to sort of steady the ship now that you've gone through a growth phase. So it's whether or not you've got the capacity to keep those people in the business in a role that's fulfilling, or whether you actually just need someone different. But I think often our retention and our staff is a we sort of see as a direct reflection of ourselves. So it can, God, people are going to think I'm a terrible employer if people are leaving, or, what is my management style? Do I want to fire really quickly, or do I want to give people time? And, I really like this person, or like there's a lot of things that come along with it that I think can get in the way of good decision making. Because you said to me, you've got a theory about hiring and firing.
Well, they do say hire slow, fire fast. But I think that's much easier said than done. Especially,
do you do that?
No.
No, okay, fine.
Because if you're a small team, I think also people deserve time and they deserve opportunities.
Right.
And I also think people are people. Like, we go through things, if you're, my whole CEO yourself thing is like, if you're unhappy at home, it's hard to be happy at work, and vice versa.
Right.
You need to think about your career and your personal life equally. You're at work so often, but if you're going through a bad breakup, you're obviously not going to be on point in that presentation.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's like, I don't care about the presentation.
Yeah,
guess what?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think people deserve a chance. And also it comes back to inevitably like your management style often.
Yeah.
So like I usually will look more at where I've gone wrong and then try to find ways to rectify it. But with that said, I think sometimes when it doesn't feel right, it inevitably isn't right and it doesn't become right.
It's interesting for me because I've hired and fired many people in 15 years. So for me, I've had every variation of drama that could exist from that process. And I'm less emotional about it now because it's a part of running a company. So, and the more you do it, the more you probably become a bit desensitized. But I was having a conversation recently with my managing director. She was saying, we've got someone in the team who, I don't think really wants to be here anymore. They've kind of checked out. Their work has their quality of work has reduced slightly. And the conversation we were having was I said to her, in your management style, do you want to meet that where it is and pull her aside and say, look, this is obviously where you're at, we'll support you, but it's probably time to go? Or are you going to wait for her to make that decision because you feel, and it's like, it is a choice. And I've done it both ways. And when you let someone decide when to leave, that is a terrible way to do it.
I agree.
But, it's about what you're comfortable with. And maybe you do that. And then next time you go, that wasn't the best thing to do.
I think it's just incredible that you have written this particular book. And I want to just read out for the listener.
Okay, I'll blush.
What you've written on the back. But busyness has become a status symbol. And that is just so true. Mm-hmm. And I have subscribed to that in the past. And I have been trying to click unsubscribe for the past kind of 18 months, particularly because of motherhood. But you say it's colloquially used to intimate success. Mm-hmm. And it is. Mm-hmm. And I find the more I run and the more I seemingly achieve, particularly because of social media, the more people kind of celebrate and applaud. But in actual fact, it's always checking in with how does it truly feel for me behind the scenes. How do you manage so much? You're not just working on your business, you're working in it, and you have a number of huge international clients. You've then taken the time out to write a book. How do you navigate that? Because you're one of the busiest people I know. So for you to write this book, I think is very interesting.
Yeah,
compelling.
So I started a podcast years ago called the Busyness Podcast because I was really interested in this idea of busyness as a status symbol and the fact that the busier you are, the more successful you are. And there's never been any challenge to that. So this is my coming up to the end of my 13th year running my company. And, I work in an industry, I work in PR where, noise and sometimes fluff and events and campaigns and, that's sort of the currency. So you're hardwired to consider that cadence of these flash bulbs to have to be quite frequent. But it's very interesting how you shape your personality based on the cues you get socially from other people. So I was always late to stuff because I was busy, and that wasn't seen as something negative. That was seen as something positive because I was so busy that, she won't be here on time, we'll order for her or we'll do. And so the cues I was getting were like reinforcing this idea that I was successful. And then we've seen, it's not my style, but we've seen this explosion on social media of sort of the overshare, perhaps. But people, people put up like a picture of their calendar for the day, and it's, it's not empty. Like that wouldn't be great content. It's like, look how many meetings I have, and, look how much I've packed in. And there's this aggressive focus on input. And I went through a sort of 6-7 year kind of health journey, which I'm still on. But I used to go to PT sessions. I had PT sessions for a year, twice a week. And it wasn't maximum effort for an hour. There's like a variation in those sessions. And I started to think about the idea of focusing on impact as opposed to input. And I do think that we have created a narrative where we consider successful people to be the most tired, late, possibly flaky because their prioritization, their hierarchy is sort of all over the place. And, when people say, God, you look tired, and you sort of, it's like, well, I don't want to look tired, but it sort of means I'm working hard. And I couldn't go to that because I had a work thing. And I was just like, what is everyone actually doing? And then I started to test on myself and look at how I would feel if I were to take stuff out. And it felt very strange. It felt very counterintuitive. And then I thought, I didn't go on social media for 8 months. And I thought, what would it be like? There's a bit in the book about going ghost. And it's about sort of reconnecting with what's like physically in front of you. And I wanted to unpick this sort of cultural, social idea that the busier you are, the more successful you are. And for me, it was a transition of there's a difference between a busy life and a full life. And they sometimes look similar, but, they feel very different.
So, Emily, talk to us more specifically around what you've created in this book and what it offers.
So the book it's called Smarter, 10 Lessons for a More Productive and Less Stressed Life. In my experience, the ambitious, high achieving people I know are not trying to reduce things from their life. They're still trying to have full relationships and, achieve at work and take on more stuff, have kids, etc. So the picture, they want to be fuller. And it's about creating smarter systems and processes in order to be able to do that. So it's a 10-step or 10 lessons. They all begin with the letter M. And because I did 3 and then thought, well, if I can do 3, maybe I'll do 10. And it's chronological. So the things you learn at the beginning of the book sort of stack as you go through. And there's some really, really practical stuff in there about actual systems and processes that can be implemented that hopefully people sort of haven't heard or been introduced to before. There's also a lot about reframing and seeing things differently. So challenging the idea of vision boarding, looking at what your day-to-day is like, recrafting your morning. So I talk about the 8 a.m. club as a bit of a sort of antidote to the 5 a.m. club, which I know is very unpopular with parents, and I understand why. Tracking your energy, not your time, creating your own definitions, cultivating and protecting a positive environment. So I've tried to make it very practical because my experience reading a lot of these books, whether it's James Clear or Malcolm Gladwell or Ben Horowitz or Seth Godin, is that you sort of want to be able to go away and implement things into your day-to-day. So
how did you practically implement it to get to a place where you could run a huge business and write a book?
So I will say that there is some context here, which is I'm now at a point in my career where I have a managing director, I have a team, I have enough momentum that if I was not in the business today, it wouldn't fall apart. And I have a PA who helps me manage my time and my diary, and I think things would be very challenging without her. But I was very clear when I wrote this book, as with everything I do, that I wanted to be able to add value. So something I do a lot with my clients is I'm not interested in just turning the wheels. I would like to be able to show up and add some sort of value to something. So I'd thought about the book. I'd had the podcast as an early iteration. Last summer, I decided this is what it's going to be. I looked at a lot of research from Mintel and McKinsey and various other trend reports at, what were the real concerns, and also the political landscape, which I think is important, and particularly for women, young people who want to be prosperous, who are ambitious. The narrative is very skewed towards people being lazy in the media. That is, we're sort of a nation that's grinding to a halt. People are lazy, people want 4-day weeks. That's the narrative. And actually, anecdotally, the people I meet are the opposite. They want to work and they want to be prosperous and they want to buy a house and they want to offer something to the world, to their community, to their family. And so I felt very disconnected from this narrative. And as I was doing my research, sort of found people who perhaps were more aligned with what I was thinking. And I was very clear this year that I had to have structure in place. But one of the things that I talk about in the book is tracking your energy, not your time. And in order to write the book, I thought, I'm not going to be able to just sit for 2 hours a day and write this book. That's just not going to work. So it's going to come more in flashes. And often they were weekends or evenings for me. And so I edited my diary. So I wasn't very social for the first 6 months of this year, or when's this coming out? So last year, 2024. And I was very disciplined, and I was very comfortable with the fact that I would, if I was away a lot at weekends or doing things, I would not only have quite a low social battery, but I just wouldn't have the time. So I understood that it would have to be something I did sort of around my day job, and was quite protective of my energy. I probably didn't anticipate the tail of it. So once it came out, I had 2 weeks where I was sort of floored, because I think it's just so much adrenaline and so much excitement. But it was, I think the energy piece was important. Also prioritization. The book was, the agreement I had with the publisher, my non-negotiable was that it had to come out in 2024. And so they said, we have to write it by the end of January. So I wrote it by the end of January. And then it was the editing process that was more challenging. And you're just toing and froing for 6 months. And it's just, less fun perhaps than, promoting it or writing it. I would say that I have a full-time job and a business, and that's what pays my mortgage. So that comes first. So I didn't, I couldn't take days off to go to a writing retreat. And, I was very clear that I had to sort of fit it around that. So, but it also, this is a culmination of 15 plus years of working alongside really brilliant people, where through osmosis you sort of gain lots of insights. So I was never sat with a blank page figuring out what to write. It was all there.
You talk about busyness leading to burnout. Did you get to the point of burnout?
Yeah, many times.
Okay.
Didn't learn the first time. I think it was, my relationship with busyness and productivity now, when I look back, I think it's very, very intrinsically connected to self-esteem. I think there is a lot to be said for wanting to prove our value and our worth, and in the eyes of others, and that performative success is rewarded in the same way as actual success, if not more. And so what I was saying earlier about responding to social cues, it's quite addictive. So I do think people get addicted to that. When I started, I was 22 years old, so I had no information about anything. And I think the pressure was just so extreme, and the value I placed on things that now are sort of laughable, but at the time it was so important, and I used to get myself in such a muddle.
Can you give us an example?
So I am not naturally financially literate. I'm good with words. I find numbers harder, and I thought that, and I still feel that whatever, even if you have a specialist in a function, you have to know what they're doing. But at the beginning, I was like, I need to be able to do everything. And also you don't have any money. So you're just like, well, I can't afford to do that. Anyway, I had a accountant who spent all my VAT. So I got a 60 grand bill from HMRC that I had to repay immediately, which obviously I couldn't. And I arranged a repayment plan with them, but it was, they want the money as quickly as possible. So it was 5 grand a month. And at that time I was probably 25. So 5 grand a month was sort of profit, was a great month. So it just wiped that out. So I basically had to work very hard for a year to stand still. Obviously I learned a lesson about knowing and trusting and delegating and all that kind of stuff. But it was...
that honesty is so important, because I'm sure so many people with small businesses have experienced something so similar.
Yeah.
You trust people around you, you overspend, or, you don't put enough cash in the safe, in the reserves, and you end up in these pickles. It can happen very easily.
Yeah, and I think also there's shame, because I think...
Because you're expected, or you put a pressure on yourself to know everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't know everything,
and you're
especially
telling
if you're a young
everyone it's all stunning.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, is that...
Back to the performative
this is the thing.
Yeah.
Every time I saw anyone, they'd be like, and you're doing so well. And you're like, I am being sued by the government for tax, but sure. You sort of think, or people...
But what an important lesson to learn so young, because I'm sure you've been so conscientious since.
I remember when I was much younger going to a party, and I talked to my dad about it afterwards, and I was telling him about it, and there were people there spending, it was like in a club, and they were spending so much money on this table, and they were buying like alcohol that was thousands of pounds a bottle. And I remember telling my dad, and my dad said, look, it's okay to go to that for fun, but you just have to be able to leave and understand that is not your life and it is not real life. And that really stuck with me, this idea that you have to be able to understand where you are and what you have access to, and be very connected to that, but also understand that this performative idea is divorced from your reality. So I see Instagram purely as a marketing tool, and I assume that is what everyone else is doing. So I don't really put much super personal stuff on there because no one cares. But I also, I think that the performative thing is very addictive. And the issue is that you put all these wins on, we've raised money, we've won this award, we've gone to 10 Downing Street, we've been honoured by this, thing no one's ever heard of, but we've got a plaque. And it goes and it goes and it goes and it goes. And then people go, oh my God, you're doing so well, and your parents must be so proud. And I saw you did this. And, because that's what you're putting out. And if that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger between your reality day to day and the way people perceive you, that for me is the danger zone. And that's where I got stuck, because, what are you going to do? Be like, no, I'm actually having a shit time. You sort of go, oh, thank you so much. And then on your way home, you're thinking, what if I get found out? Or everyone thinks I've got loads of money now because I've started a company, or all these things that are scary. And yeah, I had stomach ulcers. I ended up in hospital. I had serious panic attacks, really bad social anxiety. And again, this gap gets wider and wider, where you get this public face where you're sort of, oh my God, I can't believe you started a business so young. And you're like, thank you so much. And then you're sort of crying in the loo. And
how do you, because you've basically answered my question, but my question was, how can people separate their work output from their self-worth? So how have you managed to ensure that gap remains small? Because, and we could talk about social media for days, and I don't want to do that, but something I love to do here is debunk the facade of social media.
Yeah.
Because it is, as you said, it's a marketing tool, and people are taking 100 photos and putting up the best one, and it is performative, and it's not real, and
it's a short
often
window.
The people I know in the industry who have the glossiest profiles are the least happy at home. And it's really important that people hear that, because so many of our listeners look at all these glossy facades and think, why aren't I achieving to that level, or why did I look like that, or whatever it is. And I love to tell people, and I'm so glad you have as well, it's not real. And because they're playing in that arena, that is often where the self-worth in reality, when you know these people, is incredibly low.
Yeah.
And they really struggle.
Yeah, and I think then they're getting more and more addicted to, it's like in any relationship, if you make positive bids for attention from your partner and they're not seen, you start to make negative bids because you need, which is why people like flirt with someone in front of their partner or do stuff, because they're like, the attention is the same. It is just you're not getting it from positivity, so you start doing negative bids. And I think that's when it can feel quite frantic, and that's when people log on to LinkedIn and they feel a sense of anxiety because everyone's doing better than them. We actually say to our clients, I had a meeting yesterday about 2025 strategy, and one of our clients was saying that they wanted to do certain stunts, which I hate stunts. And I said, is this just an echo chamber on LinkedIn, or is this actually a good marketing idea? Because it can be very noisy, these sort of founders that talk to each other and you're either in it or you're not in it. And I think to try and answer your question, I think the most important thing is to create your own definition of value. And that was a turning point for me, is that it is a nice to have if people buy the book, like my Instagram post, think what I'm doing is interesting. I genuinely like connecting with people. I genuinely enjoy hearing people's stories. I am a storyteller by trade, so I find that fascinating. And I've been very, very lucky to be in the room with some people who've created amazing stories and helped them work out how to tell them. But the things that I actually value are things I can touch and hold and feel, and they are small. They are speaking to my family, being able to move my body, renting a house that has a fireplace so I can have a fire on a Friday night, being able to access nature. They're things that other people can't necessarily input in or comment on. And I have learned the hard way that I spent a long time valuing what other people told me was valuable. And so there was always a disconnect. And actually now I'm much more connected to that. So
and the realization that, to be honest, no one cares. I want you to be happy, whatever that looks like. Is that running a merge or being a writer or being a mother? It's what makes you happy, genuinely, truly happy. And that's what your family want for you and the people who love you and your inner circle. So unsubscribing from other people's perceptions or expectations of you and realizing, what is it that makes you feel alive inside, I think that's been the joy of my 30s, is letting go of what other people think. And
it's interesting as well, because it's like, I think externally it can look the same. So like if someone was looking at my social media now, they would see, oh, she's in this magazine with the book, or she's been on this podcast, or so you're still showing the highlights reels. It's just behind the scenes. I know that is a very specific marketing tool to focus on an output. And I'm also less. I think it's an experience thing. I think the more you see how the sausage is made, for want of a better phrase, the more like people win awards because they know someone who made the decision, or, it's like, it's not as
glossy.
And it's, I think if you're a young founder, it's really difficult because there is a pressure, particularly if you have investors, you've got to win awards, you've got to do all this stuff. But I think the tweak is you've got to see it as a part of a strategy for your business, as opposed to a personal reflection of your value. And I think that's really important,
Beautifully said.
For me to sell 1 million copies of that book will be because people really connect with the product and the book, and all the stuff I'm doing now is edging me closer and closer and closer to that goal.
You've had incredible success already.
Well, I haven't sold 1 million books yet, but it's only been a month. So
but you've
we'll
already
see.
been on the bestsellers list, no?
But yeah, it is a bestseller. It's very exciting. I've done a US publishing deal, which is going to be fascinating to see how the Americans respond to these sorts of topics. I'm sort of starting research now. And yeah, I think it's, for me, when I wrote this, it was always intended to be a business card. So it was like a way to have conversations that I'm genuinely interested in and talk to people and it was a great product to enable me to do that. I do think it's valuable. I do think there's stuff in there that will help people. But I just think what an amazing thing to be at a point in my career where I can have the opportunity to write something in this little paper house and talk to people about it. And, you know, some people want to talk back. So I think that for me is just a really fabulous opportunity.
Now we're going to pivot to your CEO superpower.
Yes.
Which is resilience.
It is.
Can you talk about why you chose resilience as your CEO superpower and how you handle setbacks in business?
Yeah. I chose it because I think it's become a little bit contentious, the idea of resilience. I think we have often been presented with these topics in extremes. And I think sometimes when people think about resilience, they think about stoicism and not being emotional. And that's not necessarily my version of it. I consider my business journey to be, if you imagine a rugby field, you are running with the ball and being tackled every step you take. And there are times where you're like, do you know what, honestly, just take the ball, just take it, it's fine. And sometimes you have to reset, but it is inches down that pitch and you're getting hit for, you know, and knocked out over, and it's actually, you're just sort of getting up and tired, etc. And I think that the way that I see resilience is you have to be mindful of the realities of what taking on a business is and entails. And I would say challenges outweigh the wins. I think the reality is that everyone I've ever spoken to who runs a business doesn't celebrate really their wins. It's something people are really bad at because, you know, by the time the book comes out, you've been writing it for a year and it's sort of, you're now thinking, what am I going to do for next Christmas? And people don't really stop. It is almost like jumping from crisis to crisis. And I don't think it's about omitting those things or eliminating them. I think it's about mastering them. And I think resilience is a realistic skill that is required if you want to run a company and work with people and create something in a space that maybe doesn't exist before you've decided to do it. And resilience is about momentum. It's really about just kind of continuing. And sometimes it feels like you're wading through treacle, and sometimes, you know, you catch the breeze and it's great. But it is the ability to sort of continue moving, I think, in spite of challenges that will happen, that are inevitable.
How do you lean into the patience that is required to maintain momentum in those difficult moments?
I think sometimes knowing when to zoom out is important. Like people talk about, you know, you can't see the wood for the trees, and there's various sayings about when you sort of get closer and closer and closer and you get into like a bit of a death spin or death spiral. I think that it's much easier when you're not in it to think about it's not that serious, but when you're in it, it does. It feels like the most serious thing ever. And you sort of set your stall out and said, I've got this company and this is my identity and this is what I'm doing. And when things rock that, it can be really destabilizing. The time that it's happened that was the scariest was probably COVID, because I was 9 or 10 years into my business. We'd had a great year the year before COVID, and suddenly it felt fragile. And you think, oh my God, I didn't own a property. I didn't have really much savings. Like, this is it. And now I'm not even sure what that's going to look like. I think accepting failure is a possibility is a really key part of resilience. I don't think about it every day, but it is possible, and I fear it less. Whereas in my 20s, it was like, I cannot fail. Whereas now I sort of accept it more. I think that I think things rarely get it. I read something the other day that said, muddy water clears when left alone. And I quite liked that, you know, if you think about that, if you're just kind of making it muddier and muddier and muddier and muddier, and sometimes you just need to step back and sort of let it settle. So I've learned a lot about that. I've learned a lot about how no one cares as much as you do. And there are no rules. You don't have to tell people how you're getting on social media, or, you can try and connect with people who can help you. I think isolation is not always that helpful. I was quite isolated in my 20s. I didn't have a partner. I was, business partner or life partner. So going through that stuff on your own is quite hard. I think that there's also... it's about boundary setting, which is, I don't think anyone's ever taught. I mean, I certainly was completely boundaryless. And I think having a connection to your values and creating boundaries, and most people can create boundaries. That's not really the difficult part, but enforcing them is hard. And it is also due to your self-esteem. What do I deserve? But I think the boundary piece is very connected to resilience. And sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes you have a really bad day, and sometimes you have a really bad week. And if you have things going on in your personal life, it's very hard to have a lot of creative energy to go to work. And I don't think we think about energy sources in that way, because if spiritually or emotionally you're very drained, you probably can't go and do a PB in the gym, because your physical energy has to iterate based on that. So I think hopefully life is long, and there are very, very few examples of people who have pitched up and become a millionaire in a year, irrespective of how they sort of present online. And most businesses I've worked with that are really successful are 20 plus years old, and they have staying power, and they're not in a rush, and they're not kind of worried about what other people think. They're very connected to what they're doing. And look, I had a mentor take his own life in my early 20s. I've had people I loved and invested in so much leave and go to competitors. I've had clients fire me after 5 years on an email, and every variation where you just feel awful, and it's just part of the dance. And if you have a product, it might get delisted, and you might get sued, and someone might leave, and someone might try and take your idea. And it's like, we should be encouraging people that these are parts of a journey. Raising money, part of a journey, allows you to go to the next phase, rather than telling people there's a version that's rosy all the time.
Thank you so much for your incredible words of wisdom. There are so many avenues I'd love to go down, but we're almost at time.
I'm sorry.
I feel I could do episode 2 and 3 and 4 on so many different topics, but I think the burning question for me, and probably the listener, is back to, you've written a book about productivity.
Yes.
And my first question was, how do you do it? Can we just talk about your top tips, or a day in the life, or how you habit stack, or what it is that you do that you've learned, those top easy tips that you've learned after all these years, that the listener could implement in their lives to be more productive?
Yeah. I remove small, boring admin decisions from my day by either automating, or, I pretty much always wear the same thing or eat the same thing, or I just don't have to think about that kind of stuff. I always look ahead for the week. So if I have a big work event or a particularly draining day where I'm pitching, or, more FaceTime, or doing reviews with the team, I will moderate my diary for the next day based on knowing that I will feel a certain way. So I'm very connected to my energy. I am very connected to setting myself up to win. So I don't book 5 a.m. spinning classes, because I will not go. I am very mindful of what I eat, how I move. I mean, I don't drink alcohol, but I'm kind of connected to how I feel in my body. In terms of more practical stuff, I would say my mornings are precious. So I'm a big fan of the 8 a.m. club. I don't try and rise performatively so I can tell everyone I got up at 5 a.m. My rhythm is better sort of between 7 and 8. I would say that I am a fan of habit stacking or habit pairing. So I only watch reality TV in the gym, which means I go to the gym a lot more as a treat. I don't have journals and planners, and I'm very aware that they're hugely popular, but I think it can be reductive and actually waste a lot of time. And I think it is a bit performative. People show off that they've got the planner, they show off how much they've got to do that day. So for me, it's 3 big decisions a day is all I'm able to make. I mean, no one's really having to make more than 3 big decisions a day, certainly at work. Very good at deprioritizing, working out the difference between urgent and important. I say to my team, there's a reason when you go to A&E, the person with the with no arm gets seen before you with your sprained finger. You know, people are literally presented with what is urgent, what is important, and not all your tasks are urgent. And I have a desk timer. I think that's a good one. And I run my day in minutes, not hours. So 480-minute day, which I find to be very productive.
What about boundaries? Because that's been a big journey for me in the last few years, learning to say no. And as you said, not allowing your ego to get away from you. Lately, I've said no to so much, and it's been terribly challenging both personally and professionally, because then you see that big event go and you go, oh, I could have met that person and asked them on the podcast, or, you know, I could have had that opportunity. Being okay with the fact that you don't need to be at all things and you don't need to do all things, and that things will happen as and when they're meant to. Mm-hmm. How do you encourage the listener who's like, okay, I need to start implementing boundaries to do so?
So I think the first part of boundary setting is connecting with your values. So there's a exercise in the book, but it's about understanding what's really important to you. So if you see that event and you think, oh, I should have been there because then I could have done this, that, and the other, you know, there are probably other ways to make those connections. And the thing you're actually connected to is that you are trying to further your business and you felt like that was an opportunity. And there will be another way to take advantage of that opportunity. And so I think it's about really connecting with, you know, I always think I'm not a jealous person. I never have been in any capacity of my life. But if I see someone, you know, doing something and go, oh God, that's great, I always connect with what do I actually think? I think, God, they've sold 1 million copies of their book and I would really like to do that. So now I'm going to reset and work out with that feeling what I'm going to do next to try and further that, as opposed to just sort of being annoyed that someone else has done it. But we have soft boundaries and we have hard boundaries. Hard boundaries, as you can imagine, are things that are non-negotiable. So I do not take meetings on a Friday afternoon. That's a hard boundary for me. Soft boundaries are, you know, perhaps that I don't like doing meetings before 9 a.m, but if a big client asks me to, I will very much be there. So that's a softer boundary. We also have different, you know, physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, etc. So I think learning more about that's important. Boundary setting isn't just about saying no, it's also about creating language and systems that you can give to other people so they understand how to interact with you and make your life and their life easier. So it's a really good communication tool as well. And most people know when a boundary's been crossed. You know, it's you sort of have a feeling about when something's been crossed. I find most people know always when that is. It's more about whether they have a level of comfort to kind of enforce it. And that's often a fear that it won't be enforced, or someone won't respect it, or someone will challenge you. We spoke about this the other day, but I used to say yes to everything. And I think at times in your life you have to, you know, if you're starting a company, or I do try and speak to as many people and say yes to things. But it's like, if I don't want to do it now, I ain't going to want to do it, you know, on the day. So I'm much better at saying I can't come to that, or I can't do that.
I think you're right that there's seasons. Like when I moved to the UK, I had to say yes to everyone because I had no network, I had no community, people. And I had to be out and about. But then you get to a point a few years in and you go, okay, I have a wonderful network and I've done my, I've walked and I'm ready to sit. Yeah.
Someone I used to work with from a brand said to me that the hours you give out in the week have to be repaid. So if you want to go to events every night of the week, that's fine, but that's 2 hours a night. So that's 10 hours that you've got to get back at the weekend to replenish. And I do think about it like that, you know, it's a cycle and you can't just continue to do it. And also, you know, you get to a point, I can go to an event for 20 minutes and probably be as impactful as someone who goes for 4 hours. You know, it's like, it's about that output piece. And sometimes it's just useful. Sometimes I go to events and I see 6 people I really like that I haven't seen, that we were struggling to get a date in the diary, and it sort of works and we can come up with stuff. But it's, I'm not a partier. I don't drink. I'm not going because I want to sort of have a free dinner. I'm going to sort of as a collection to see people and connect, or learn how someone else does something, or, you're always thinking, probably same as you, you're like, oh, the person who did that branding was really good. I'll ask them who did that. Or the playlist was great. I'd love to nick that for an event I'm going to do. You're sort of constantly absorbing information. But yeah, I maintain, if I try and only do the things that I can do, and if someone else can do them, they should be doing them.
Now, in closing, is there a quote you live by that you'd like to share?
The quote I really like is, "If the wind will not serve, take to the oars."
I love that.
That's my fave.
Where can we find the book?
Amazon, Waterstones, Foyles, WH Smith, and in January it is going to be in anthropology.
Amazing. And where can we find you?
On Instagram or on LinkedIn, I would say, is Emily Austen.
And we'll find Emerge via you?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Giving us a moment of your time to like, rate, or follow CEO Yourself will make a huge difference to our future.